It was good, y'all. Welcome back. I think one of the big things, no introduction. I think one of the big things that really bothers you in life, or at least has bothered me, has been this sense of self. Like, what is your identity? Like, who are you? And I actually made a video called "Who Are You," which, if I recall correctly, I was talking about like elements of self-expression. One of the things that builds up to that is like self-expression. This kind of revolves around your identity. I don't know if you ever heard of the idea, like, do you have friends that are like really like you, or is it just the proximity? Do you have similar circumstances, which means that you have similar incomes and therefore gonna have hobbies around just similar possibility, similar capability? Like, what does it mean to really bond with someone? What does it mean to actually have this identity? Like, some of it you're just born with, some of it you inherit, right? And that comes stuff with like your ethnicity and then your consequent ethnosphere, or your stature and how people treat you, how you appear, how you choose to self express. Self expression is also a product of your financial or physical environment, in which the ways that you're able to express yourself have been inherently attached to the physical capacities to express yourself. So I'm not an expert on this stuff, but that's a long way of saying that self expression, you know, at least here in America, has been inherently tied to like what is socially acceptable, what you have access to socially as well. And that begs the question of like, what really are you? Like, if you ever heard of the anarcho idea that it only takes 3 days for a society to crumble, that if everything were to disappear, where do your morals stand? How many of those morals are constructed? What separates the constructed morals from you? That's what an anarcho society wants to analyze. And there's so many different ways of processing these thoughts, but the true answer is that we'll never know, because your identity will always be a construct of surviving within the mechanisms which exist of your current life. Of course, you would be different if you lived in anarcho society, because, well, there would be different success criteria. A lot of people nowadays, you don't have to be physically strong in order to have value in this world. And even if it inherently gains respect from some people, because you look or appear strong and you appeal to traditional sentiments of masculinity, for example, that doesn't mean that it has to be the case. And where this starts to come up is structures of power. I've talked about it a little bit on the channel. I try to make a good video explaining critical theory. A really common topic is critical race theory, the idea that does race even exist at all. But where it particularly bothers me, it's not necessarily protest, so to speak, but it is this mixture of self-expression, of identity, of what is acceptable, and it informs your identity. I think a really good example of this is homosexuality. I grew up at a time where you weren't, I'm not going to say you weren't allowed to be gay, but it wasn't cool to be gay. And a lot of people struggled for that. I don't know if people have heard of Harvey Milk, and I think he was some politician in San Francisco. Guy got murdered just for being gay. And that was a identity thing that had no relation to his politics, whatever. People made it a part of their politics. How you appear, how you present yourself. If you see somebody out there in a crop top and that's how they chose to present themselves, versus if you see somebody in a suit, you're gonna see the person in the suit more favorably because they're appealing to a traditional sentiment of power, which has existed way before you. But you see people as more professional just because they're wearing a suit. And if you feel more like yourself and feel proud of expressing your body in a crop top, and that's a self-expression that is acceptable to you, but it's not acceptable to other people, now you can't wear it in order to get your point across. Like, these are just necessary evils that we like to call it. And a lot of people just accept this for how it is. I think you look at a place like Berkeley, for example, or SF, and it's super progressive, but they still appeal to these traditional sentiments just for the sake of being able to get their point across and being able to get it heard in the rooms that it needs to be heard. And it's so crazy, right? But this is what it means to have a society. It's like, it's not necessarily that the person wearing the crop top is bad or evil for expressing themselves that way, but at least for them, it's significant that you don't want to provide more opportunities, so to speak, for somebody to perceive you in a certain way. For example, growing up as a child, I, I'm phrasing this poorly, but at some point in your life, you'll start to develop urges and you'll start to see things a certain way. And you're realizing that clothing is a thing of modesty. And have you ever heard about like dress code at schools and why it's more strict on girls rather than guys? It's because self-control is hard and people have impulses. And most of those codes are to protect not the teachers from students, but from the students from teachers, if you're catching my drift. And that's an alarming thing. But the societal construct is so people don't take advantage of each other. We don't trust each other. That's why crime exists. That's why police exist. That's why a legal system exists, because we can't trust each other. And by providing this framework of accountability, we can reduce those urges. And the big takeaway from all this is people still break those crimes anyway. People still protest and do things that are illegal and maybe in a not visible way, and therefore it is be socially acceptable. Maybe you do crimes and you're in a position of authority and nobody has the authority to hold you accountable for those crimes, even though the people know that you do it, and that is also acceptable. Even if it's not socially acceptable by the system that people constructed with flaws, it is acceptable. And this comes to a notion of civic protest, right? How can you protest in a way in which people will find it acceptable and hear your message? And this always comes down to expressing yourself in a pre-existing social structure, which, long story short, there really is no just being yourself. I always found it that it's a very unuseful piece of advice that I wanted to be profound and I wanted it to be useful. It's like, you grow up saying, oh, crime is bad, and then you get to college and people are underage drinking and they're doing drugs that you've never heard of, and nobody really cares until somebody gets a DUI, or somebody puts themselves in danger, or they get an overdose. Like, no one really cares until those consequences are grave enough, even if the thing was illegal and designed there to protect people. And you see people doing things that are bad for their bodies fundamentally, or bad for their futures, and they're willing to take a risk which is greatly out of proportion just to enjoy the moment. And for a lot of people, it's socially acceptable, even if it is not legally acceptable. So if laws don't bound what's acceptable in society, doesn't always bound what's acceptable, because it varies across region and where you're from, and if you have enough social status. There's another weird notion out there where it's like people can show vulnerability, like Victor Wembanyama, for example, when you have enough social credit, where you become a sort of deified enough object, where you're an NBA player, you have this certain clout, this certain aura to you, in which you don't need to be this perfected vision of a man because you already are man enough. It's these ideas of masculinity, of identity, which are estranged from the self, that limit people in their forms of self-expression. And I don't want to get into the whole like trans debate. I don't want to get into the homosexuality, heterosexuality, the whole LGBTQ plus community, like all of this way outside of the scope of my own expertise and analysis. But all of this is just to drive the point home that like your sense of self and who you are and what is acceptable to be expressed or to not be expressed is super fluid. It's super dynamic, and it's completely dependent not only on your surroundings but also your circumstances. I feel like that's the same thing. That's a synonym. And the people that you are around, and it is something which is forever changing. Like, I remember it used to not be cool to like watch anime and be a weeb, and then it suddenly like became cool, and now you have all these people asking about the anime that you used to make fun of. It used to not be cool to be Asian, and now it's suddenly everyone's talking about like K-pop and all of that, and that's a strange feeling. How society just shifts, our culture just shifts, right? And it's not something that's like written in law. It's just a social construct, which always bothered me, right? There's no crime for being Asian. There's nothing wrong with being Asian. But there is a crime for like underage drinking and for abusing particular drugs that aren't legal, and like weed, for example, and then became legalized. People still frown on it. So even though it not be may always, and smoking, for example, nicotine messes up your brain, messes up you. It's just objectively not a good thing for you, but it is socially acceptable to sell. For some, it is socially acceptable to consume, even though we all know that it is fundamentally bad. Same thing with the smoking, for your health, for your longevity, but people don't care, and that's strange, right? That's not good. So, guess taking away from the crash out part of this really long tangent that I've had where I struggle to actually stay on to the point, the original idea that I wanted to hold on to. It was, yeah, there is no yourself. There's not just being you. There's being you within the context of a society. There is being you within the context of, well, just you and your thoughts, and separating them from your external identity and your internal identity and your self-expression, which lies somewhere in between. And that kind of brings me to now. I feel like everyone has a clear notion of this identity crisis. You have this life that you live, and you're just focused on living that life and becoming successful, which in your own terms of success, making the days go by, whatever. And somewhere in there, you have this idea that, am I really living a life that I truly want to live? Am I living a fulfilling life? Am I happy? Do I really want to live long? Do I really want to do this job? All that stuff. And victims of living, so to speak. But at least for me, all of this social credit stuff, all of this appealing to things that were never existed until I did, all of these notions, it always bothered me that I'm like, why do I have to appeal to all these people that came before me? Is my life really just meant to be lived through the lens of other people's ideas? And I preach to not be fooled by external validation, but to a certain extent, we need some. You're not going to get any money unless people like the things that you do. You need to be able to offer some service or some good that genuinely improves people's lives. And that is not playing the zero-sum game, right? Day trading is an example of a zero-sum game where in order to win, somebody else has to lose. Meanwhile, if you add some value to society, you still have to add value to society. You're always going to be judged through the lens of other people and have to provide value to some subset of people in order for you to trade that value for other goods and service within a capitalist society. And that's still true in any other society, but that's the only one that I have lived in. And that doesn't feel like freedom, does it? If you're living by other people's standards, you have to, well, live by other people's standards, just fundamentally. And you have to appeal to other people's standards. If you present yourself a certain way, people are going to look at you a certain way. And the way that you want to express yourself, which I think I've talked about in the past, but the things that you say may not be interpreted as the way that you intended. And the way that you speak needs to be diluted or at least filtered in order for other people to understand it. You can't act the same way that you do with your friends as the way you might act with your family or with people that you don't know, because there is this silent contract of what is socially acceptable within a lens of people that you know and people that you don't. And people don't like feeling like you're super familiar with them if they don't want to be familiar with them. I've gotten complimented on people making it feel like I've been best friends with them for a very long time. I've been complimented on the very nature that people have hated me for as well. I'm a very unhinged person. I speak very candidly, but I try not to speak bluntly because there is a difference. Blunt is speaking everything that comes to your mind ever, always, which, so contrary to popular belief, I don't do. I just speak very honestly, or I speak in ways in which may not be super socially acceptable because I find it entertaining, but I have my limits. I'm a teacher, I'm an educator. I talk in a context which I know is socially acceptable all the time, and I know how to be professional as well. It's a super common skill that I have developed, and unfortunately, it's one that I had to develop very intentionally, which sucks, because that means that in order to be taken seriously, I had to put my own thoughts into a framework in which other people can understand, which people feel like, oh, that's a really natural thing. But a lot of people just expect to be understood. You want to just be in a relationship. You want to find somebody who speaks your language, so to speak. You want somebody to look at you and try to understand what you mean, what you're trying to say, just for the sake of them. People don't want to have to try to speak or try to be understood. A lot of people just want to be. And I've been there. And for a very long time, I thought it was my responsibility to make myself hyper palatable, to make myself understood, to make myself processed like sugar. And as an educator, or at least within the realm of research or academia or school, That's the whole thing. It's a framework to try to make yourself easier to be understood, to understand the things that came past, and to be able to understand the things present, and to go through the frameworks in which make you understood to future people and make it so that people can document your work. The whole point of the scientific process is so that people can replicate your results and validate them by being able to replicate them over and over again, in which with relative certainty we can call it a capital T truth. And that's what I'm paying in education for. And that's what people say is important. And I think it's important to be able to be understood, because our life, our circumstances, the thing that I was really talking about, inform the way that you express yourself. And my blue might be a different color to you than your blue, and being able to come to a consensus on that, being able to communicate that is important. And that's what language and society, all of that centered around. It was finding some basis in which we could both build from and then continue to communicate from, and that got passed down. That is like the whole point. That's what society was built for. It was an implicit understanding that, hey, I can make the wheat and you can make the bread, and I can just focus on making my wheat and the other person focus on making the bread, and together we can be fed. And that was easier than one person having to make the bread and get the water and get the food and make the house and everything. It's that idea that if you wanted to just make a pencil and you had to make the paint and the graphite and the rubber eraser, if you had to make all of that from scratch, it would take you forever. But fortunately, you can just live in this society and then focus on one particular thing. So once it's established that humans are better living together, it's easier for us to specialize in particular things and come together as a society to provide those things for each other. And it's also been established that there is these preconceived rules that are for the sake of communicating with each other more efficiently and building on the work past to continue progressing as a society. What does that mean in terms of you and your identity? And at least to me, that's meant that some part of it is useful, like the academia and the following structures, and some of it should be questioned. Life should be questioned. I go to a college that was founded on protest, that was founded on upsetting social change, and now they won't let you protest within a certain proximity of the halls. They will threaten to take away the privilege that you have at the school. But shouldn't it be your right to protest? Of course it is. It is your right to be able to express yourself however you wish to express yourself, but that doesn't mean that it's going to become without consequences. You can express yourself verbally a certain way, but these are private institutions within capitalism, which means they can punish you privately however you will. So even if you do have the ability to express yourself however you wish, it still comes with silent social consequence, which means that you need to have a certain amount of social mobility in order to provide protest, which is what I was talking about with the masculinity thing, where it's not just a physical thing where I'm like, oh, I can be like buff, I can look ripped, and therefore I'll have enough social credit in order to be able to protest. It's also a physical thing. You need to have enough money, you need to have enough security to be able to protest, and the world can cancel you and you'll still have a roof over your head. You can lose your job and you'll still be okay, right? It's these NBA stars, so to speak, where they can threaten to fine them, but they'll have the ability to afford the fine. It's these movie stars that can call out ICE, and they're not politicians, and they'll be able to, well, call out ICE and still be able to afford work, because, well, calling out ICE is a socially acceptable thing, because they're murdering people, and more people find it acceptable to, not murder people than murder people. Let's just say that as a generalization, but it's not ultimately not particularly true. But I don't want to dive too deep into the politics, but yeah, it's an interesting thing. And then the other part of it is like, what part of yourself should you be willing to put up to protest? What part of it can you say is uniquely yours? And for me, that's my, self-expression. That's the speaking part. That's this part that there's really no crime to it, even though there definitely could be. And I think it would be so lame to just hold back what I say. I think it would be so lame to be stuck talking to people that I don't like or respect. I think it would be terrible to have to always have this fabricated version of myself where I could never feel candid or never feel accepted because I've always been putting on a performance. It's that terrible feeling that you would never truly be quote unquote yourself because you always feel like you had to perform to someone, and that you'd never be able to develop a connection with someone which felt genuine because you were never able to express yourself quote unquote genuinely. And that begs the question, what does it mean to be genuine? And to me, that means you don't have the filter. You don't feel like you have to appeal something. You're just talking naturally. You're talking on instinct, something which feels instinctual to you, and which you have to reach some sort of axiom in which, at least to me, that means that you speak how you feel like you should. You say what you feel like you should say. You're just doing the quote unquote right things, and then hopefully you will be rewarded for it. But as I said previously, you just hope to be understood, but that's not going to be the case. And maybe some people out there find their perfect person that teaches them every way to be understood, but that wasn't the case for me. Growing up, I very much struggled to be understood. I just preferred not to speak at all, because that meant potential failure. And eventually I learned from my parents, I learned from the people around me, a way in order to be understood, but I still would get misconstrued by people who weren't those people. I got friends telling me that I was intolerable, that I was someone to be hated because of the way that I spoke. I was, okay, this is going to sound like trauma dumping. I swear it's not. But like, I've been excommunicated from friend groups. I've excommunicated myself from friend groups just for the sake of I was unable to align with their expression. I'm somebody who I would rather not pretend that I like you if I don't. And if you're having a bad day, sure, I might be someone who could be there and lean on, but if I don't like you in the way that you express yourself and you keep complaining about a problem and not fixing it, I don't want to hear that over and over again. And if you feel like you can't open up unless you're intoxicated and I'm only getting good sentiments from you and otherwise you hate on me year round, I don't want to be around that 24/7. I find the negativity constantly very draining. And that is a pressure-full environment in which I have never particularly thrived in. And separate idea of pressure, I don't want to talk about in this lecture, but societal pressure, very significant. It's something that has always bothered me because it pushes you into a box in which you feel like you will never fit in. And this stems from a notion, some philosophy class I took, but it was like, to have unlimited tolerance is to have no tolerance at all, right? If we don't define what is good or bad within a society, or have people acting on impulses which may fundamentally do harm to other individuals. Like some of the point of societal construct is to take away these zero-sum gains, to force people to interact in such a way in which benefits a society as a whole, which is the hope, right? That we all help with each other's survival. How that actually pans out, very difficult to do. But needless to say, that be yourself, man. Just be yourself. It doesn't exist. How could I be myself if I have to be someone who is profitable, who is accepted by my family, who is accepted by my friends, things that I cannot afford to lose? It's not I could just lose them all and figured it out. It's like I physically am unable to hold myself within society or have vertical mobility in society without the friends and family that I currently have. There is no self. And what has been acceptable for some is not acceptable for all. And it's very alarming to me that I've been told that, like, you just don't have enough social credit to say that. It's like, these things would have been acceptable. These things that you've said that I've been able to say to other people, they just aren't acceptable because your reputation just sucks. And it's never going to recover. These people are always going to look at you with this light. And that's an optimization problem. I have a limited amount of time, and there's these people that I think could become great people. I think all people can become great people. I hope that they're worthy of redemption, which is a dangerous statement, but even Hitler had people who loved him. He pulled Germany out of poverty, no matter how you slice it. And that's a matter of perspective of who is a villain and who is a good person. And that good is relative. I have a separate idea that there is no thing as good. There's no such thing as morals. Right? Which, no, of course there are. You think about them and you act relative to them. But again, another societal construct. But besides this very high-level idea, what do you make which is actually useful of it? Or it's like, how have you lived in which you feel like the just be yourself advice is actually useful? And to me, that's my social interactions. I speak like this behind a camera, behind an alias, because I feel like I can speak authentically for once. I can speak unbroken, I can speak without judgment, and that's a selfish thing, right? Because realistically, you get social pressure. You get pushed back on. You get your ideas challenged. You get your experiment recreated, and so somebody couldn't recreate it. Maybe they recreated it and they got different results, and that's kind of the whole point. It's like having outside influence, having feedback, having influence, having repetition. It gives you a more robust study, and the study is your life. You're going to keep living and keep working and keep on going and keep refining, and yourself is going to change. It's the yourself that was 6 that said everything they wanted and they had really crazy dreams and they had no idea to fulfill them, or the person that you are at 25 and you have limited resources and you recognize that and you optimize and you still want to achieve your dreams and you believe in some of them blindly, but you have to approach them a little more realistically, and you're working within a framework where you still need to feed yourself in order to have tomorrow. You need to guarantee tomorrow first, and then you can work on your dreams. Is that person any different from the person that you were on your 6? And the thing is, of course they were, because the circumstances changed. You, yourself, are relative to your circumstances. Your life changes relative to what you need. And you can never be fully detached from the physical body you that needs things like food and water and shelter, and that informs your expression. Somebody who feels like, let's say transgender, for example, and in order to fully express themselves beyond just the idea, in order to become passing, needs to buy maybe makeup. Maybe they need to buy different clothes for the different self-expression. They need to go under hormones, which may or may not be federally funded, and they need to be in an area that does not persecute people for being transgender. That is self-expression that is tied to physical items that they may not be able to afford. It is a privilege to be able to express yourself and pass that way. And you can think a certain thing, but people may not look at you a certain way until you have achieved enough social credit, which may be through physical, tangible things, right? And there are people who just cannot afford to be a homosexual, right? I think it was like Egypt and Iran, and there was this, well, I think this is upcoming, but there was a pride match, they wanted to call it, where a bunch of people want to come in with a bunch of flags and a bunch of support for Pride Month, end of Pride Month. We're still in Pride Month, I believe. And ironically, it was the 2 countries that just persecute people for being gay, and they couldn't do anything about it, and they just had to deal with it because, well, they're not playing in their soil. But there could definitely be people there who have homosexual fantasies. There could be 2 people who act on those homosexual fantasies, and it's just not socially acceptable to do so, and they can't express themselves in that certain way. Now imagine if somebody thought that they were transgender, and they had no access to the physical capacities to become transgender in the way in which they would like to see themselves in the mirror, so they only have it in the mind. Other people would never see them as transgender if they came here, and they would not align with the societal expectation of somebody who is transgender, even though they can look however they want to look. That is the secret code. That is the invisible curriculum, whatever you want to call it. But your expression needs to align to an extent with the society that perceives you, or somebody else's perception needs to be grounded in the same perceptions that you have. So you can have this beautiful idea of yourself and the person that you want to become, but you still need to be able to achieve it with something physical, something tangible, something that people can relate to, because that's what language relies on. That's what humans' perception relies on. It's like the idea that we can't see very well, that we see maybe 30%. If you had the resolution of an image generated from your eyes, it would be terrible. But most of it is imagined in the mind. I don't know the numbers on that, but yeah. So I'm currently losing my train of thought. But before I sign off, just wanted to say that I still find that a useful piece of advice, that just be yourself. It's to constantly question what it is to be yourself. It's to, well, live life and experience and find what makes you feel good and what doesn't, what you think is right and what you think isn't. And while, of course, each person has their own limits, like for me, I'm not a big fan of the smoking. I don't want to get addicted to nicotine, so I never want to start. Wasn't a big fan of the parties, wasn't a big fan of people who can only express themselves when intoxicated. I do like using AI for my work, but I don't like using AI for my art. All of these things, I'm a big fan of technology. I'm a big fan of, well, appealing to traditional masculinity, but I also like speaking and being vulnerable and making content and making art, which a lot of people see as, emasculating things. And I speak very candidly, which means I can also be unhinged and out of pocket, and that's not socially acceptable either. But I still appeal to traditional sentiments of academia because I deem that being able to build on the work past is something which is important, and being able to share your experiences in a way that are being understood and make them useful is benefiting society as a whole. And I wish to express myself in that fashion. These are examples of myself within society. These are examples of how I want to interact with people. And for a while, I really struggled with this idea of self. I wanted to always go to the extremes. I wanted to always be honest, that hiding something that I knew, or not saying everything that I possibly had on a subject, was somehow lying, in which I only need to tell people the useful parts, or you only need to tell the parts that maybe resolves a conflict, or that maybe you don't need to be entirely yourself, or speak super candidly, or tell someone everything you know because it would make them uncomfortable, or because it is too much for somebody outside of societal expectations. And that's a question of self. Do I want somebody to always like me, or do I want to be the person that I am and then hope that people like that person? Do I want to ease people into me and maybe find conflicts on the road, or maybe that I meet their societal expectations and then they become someone who's a close friend of mine because they suddenly align with the values that I have, or they just didn't realize that they did, or I needed to have them grow to become a person who likes me. I'm like, all of this sucks. I'm just going to be the person that I am, and I'm going to let the ramifications follow. And at least within the framework that I've built, I have the social affordance to do that, and that uniquely informs my opinion. And it's something that I talk about a lot, that I have been told that I've been out of pocket. I've been told that I'm somebody who's very overbearing with pressure and societal expectations because I feel them. And I'm somebody who has very low tolerance for BS, while equally understanding that it's very difficult to do the right thing every single time. It's very difficult to be constantly improving. It's difficult to just be a person who is striving towards their goals and always aligns the things that they say with the things that they are, because their definition of themselves is constantly changing. And yet I still find a way to be very critical. And that's because I'm very critical of myself as well. Or maybe because people were very critical of me growing up, but I'll never truly have an answer. And that is the big idea of be yourself and control the controllables and all of that good stuff. It's just you as an individual, you do what you can. You control what you control, and you have an idea of what you are willing to tolerate and what you are not willing to tolerate, and whether it sources from something which is completely outside of your control, like your upbringing or where you were born or the environment that you grew up in, or it's something which is super intentional and well articulated. It doesn't particularly matter, because you're going to act regardless. And even if you wish to act or not act, the act of inaction is still an action. And that will inform your identity, whether you like it or not. So, what does that mean? Unfortunately, just live. And the rest of life will fall into place, whether you like it or not. And that is at least what I feel like comes from just be yourself. That you can process things in hindsight, and you can change going into the future, and your morals can change, and your alignment can change, all of this stuff. But think about your future. Think about yourself. Have some informed opinion about your identity. Be critical, think, live, breathe. But ultimately, it's all going to be you. And there's nothing you can do about that. And defining this sense of self and becoming this sense of self and trying to control the sense of self that you are and that you have is something which is ultimately impossible. And hopefully, just a hypothesis, haven't proven it. This version of yourself that you craft from your thinking, from your lifestyle, from your circumstances, from your social affordance, whatnot, becomes something which leads you to a life of happiness and fulfillment. And I'm personally still working on it. I've lost friends over this. I've gained friends over this. Some friends say that I'm a really good mentor and that they're really glad that they met me. Other people are like, you're such a burden. You made my life terrible. Or I wish I never met you. Or it's like, I'm fighting for this friendship. Why are you leaving me? Well, I don't particularly like you. It's like, well, I don't like you either. But I still wanted to fight for this because I thought that we could grow to become something together. I've had another situation. My most recent ex-girlfriend. And it was, well, I don't like these things about you, and I wish that you'd work on them, and you didn't. And, well, if you want to give us another shot, because you said you wanted to do that, then, well, things need to change. And I addressed them multiple times before, and they didn't change. And I know that you broke up with me, but I'm putting my foot down when you try to get back with me because, well, this is not the person that I signed up for. This is the person that I don't want to grow to become with either. And she respectfully told me, after thinking about it, no, this is not who I want to be. I do not want to be the person that you are describing. And we went our separate ways. And that's it. I want to become a certain person. I have this idea in my head and I'm trying to become that person. And that's the identity that I want to be, but that's not the person that I am. So you do have some sense of self. And there's the idealized self and there's your actual self. The person that exists right now. That can be constantly changing. That's why I mean there is no sense of self. It's like, it's not permanent. You just change. You grow. You live your life. So yeah. Okay, bye. I really wish I could have articulated that better, but it's my rant channel. I'm not here to give you some speech. Okay, bye.